Give it 10 seconds. Okay, we're live.
We're live. Good morning, everyone. We're getting together here to listen to the final review for Benyi. I would like to address the external reviewers and thank them for being part of this. So I'd like to mention David Correa from the University of Waterloo and Mark Sichi. Is that the correct pronunciation?
That's correct, yeah.
Sichi, yes, from HOK. Welcome, everyone. And I would like to now give the floor to Benyi. As I've been told, he has 20 minutes to make his presentation. I will pipe in verbally, just say something when there's 5 minutes left in the 20 minutes. So I open the floor now to Benyi. Good luck, Benyi.
Thanks for everyone for joining my presentation. The evolution of architecture is often accompanied by discoveries of technologies, techniques, and knowledge. In the mid-1400s, Alberti introduced a mathematical approach to architecture that uses precision drafting as a form of architecture representation and paved the way for Renaissance classicism. 4 centuries later, inventions of new mechanical technologies and fabrication methods with mass production have reformed architecture with the modernist movement. Architecture design method under the influence of modernism became standardized that embraces a functionalism and minimalism ideology with the notion of creating an international style that is suitable for any territory and cultural background. Architecture under modernism's influence adopted a top-down perspective in design as a visionary planner that often homogenizes the living condition by treating the user as a generic instead of diverse individuals. Over decades of technological evolution, digital technology has transformed the fabrication method from mass production towards mass customization. Different design fields also adopted design customization as an attempt to provide a tailoring service. The digital continuum presents a new degree of flexibility in design and fabrication. However, this feature of technology is rarely being used to respond to the social diversities of the users, but is mostly being adopted in the conventional central decision-making process to achieve a wise plan imposed by the architect. Hence, it is necessary to deploy the advanced technology of mass customization and parametric for a personalization culture in architecture. A high controlled built environment will lead to a homogenized and standardized living condition, often controlled by a small group of designers and their client. On the other end of the spectrum, a complete user-driven environment as demonstrated by the Kowloon city lacks regulation and systematic design strategy, which tend to become chaotic. Architecture should find a balance between the two separate forces of control, allowing the architect to maintain its leadership role in the design, but offer flexibility for users to customize their personal space. John Haberkin's support and infill approach initiated a flexible design attempt to address the spontaneous variety of user preferences and unpredictability of future use. His idea of balancing the separate forces of control is based on his theory of natural relation that built environment resembles an organism more than an artifact. The public engage with the built environment by acting on it rather than observing it. Haberkin suggested a separation of different levels of control in the built environment according to the lifespan and volume of users. The 3 separated levels were created for his design of mass housing. The support level is the overall structure and mechanical services. The infill represents the unit interior, such as partition wall and furniture. Lastly, the allocation layer is the boundary between the unit. This approach was intended to give user control of customizing their living environment without interfering with other fixed components of the building. However, due to lack of solution for the allocation layer and the void of systematic structure to guide the changes, most Open building projects remain fixed after construction and fail to deliver the natural relation as a diverse built environment that accept changes and transformation. In addition, this dichotomy structure with only support and infill layer has undermined and limited architects' role in design for only the building shell, the vertical space division, and the service utility. New technologies can be used to improve upon John Haverkin's support and infill approach for the design of high-density housing. Parametric can be used as an iterative design tool for user participation through establishing rules and relations. An alternative design method can be developed to include the role of the user as part of design decision process, but also maintain architect's responsibility as a designer and planner of the built environment. Therefore, incorporating the diverse needs of the users to customize the unit boundary through communication and neighborhood negotiation guided by the parametric system. The role of the architect can also be expanded in the support level from simply the design of fixed structure and mechanical services towards designing and planning of an active neighborhood relation, as well as the functioning of a community to incentivize public interaction. This thesis is investigating a network approach for participation that the architect creates a parametric framework that reflects the different categories of users' needs and provides user access to the framework to customize and personalize their individual space within the set limit. A 4-meter grid system was proposed as the initial support level. The choice of the center core design allows majority of the structure and services to be located either closer to the center or the edges of the floor plate, therefore creating an unconstrained space between the corridor and the building facade, allowing the future partition walls or demising walls to shift without interference. Unit entrances are also skip-stop for a multi-level design, providing various interior layout options and increasing the opportunities and varieties of future changes. A parametric system is then created to function with the grid system to ensure each unit have access to the corridor as well as sufficient natural light based on the overall floor space and building envelope ratio. The algorithm can ensure the nearest cube from the source cube to be selected first, therefore providing efficient unit design with higher degrees of customization. When the user first purchases their property, the parametric model offers the owner an input of their spatial needs, then pair and match the user with other existing users. The system was designed to treat the bulk of the vertical connected block as a single entity for the unit subdivision. As shown in the video, with different input of unit area and total number of units, the parametric model can assign and arrange the space cubes to different households. It ensures that the entrance marked by the white dot is skip-stop, and most entrances are positioned at the center level of the unit. When changes are required after residency, the parametric model can be deployed to offer the users different configuration options or verify the input change of allocation to maintain a satisfactory living condition for all residences. Parametric offers architects the possibility to design with variable for an interrelated and open-ended system. It operates with continuous associative geometry, which can be adjusted through the change of its input value without recreating the system. The result of such design is therefore not a single object, but according to Gael Deleuze, a class of objects that are all different as one for each set of parameters, yes, yet all similar as the underlying function is the same for all. Only a class of object can accommodate different scenarios with different variations. I also tested this parametric system with different form. In this one, the source block is vertically shifted. This parametric function can even be used with higher complexity of form that are partially carved out. So instead of design from a top-down perspective as a form of mass production with limited variation and identical copies of living condition, the design of high-density residential could be optimized with our technology to adopt the essence of mass customization and the parametrics for a personalization culture in architecture. The contemporary high-density residential projects have compacted the living space of the society and shortened the distance among residences. However, a denser living environment did not promote a healthier community, but encountering isolated individual household into their personal space, bounded by the demising wall between the units. This untouchable space boundary has created a strict physical separation between the units, reducing the chance of cross-connection, causing segregation. Therefore, having a flexible allocation level enables residents to resolve the change of their spatial needs and making community space as an outcome of neighborhood negotiation. The parametric system can offer guidance for the changing allocation level. Users are allowed to shift the space boundary at increment of 860 millimeter, which is the Mullian spacing. As shown in the diagram in the upper right, the unit in the blue color can expand their living room space to accommodate a new piano by negotiating with their neighbor. Of course, an entire space module can also be transferred for larger space arrangements, such as additional bedroom with a closet or a den as office space. In this case, when the Green resident got married, they could purchase the space module above the unit to expand. Space could not only be transferred among units, but also shared. By permitting shared space, not only a commonly used space could offer value to others, but further enhance the relation among community members. Therefore, two small student units with individual kitchen, dining space, and living room that is barely used can be transformed to have a shared kitchen and additional bedroom to accommodate another student. This example shows the possibility that shared space can provide for transgeneration families. The contemporary residential housing design is limited in the size of the unit from a studio to 3-bedroom. Therefore, the transgeneration family can only live separately in 2 different units. However, a shared space allowed the 2 units to combine the kitchen and living room for common activities between the family member. The mass production mindset has treated high-density residential units as mass-produced commodities with no interest to respond to individual need and failed to support the development of long-lasting relationship among the residents for a stable and healthy community. Therefore, the unit became a commodity that is often resold within a short time period. The changing allocation level may not be able to offer all the changes of spatial needs. However, it does offer a bigger range of possibility when changes happen. It allows the community member to act as a collective group to resolve their issues. Consequently, a dense living environment could transform from a device that isolates and anonymizes individual into a catalyst for a community. This is a simulation for the transformation of allocation layer based on the established rules mentioned in the previous slides. Through transferring and sharing unit spaces, after parametric unit distribution, we can see boundary lines between the modules are vertically aligned. However, as time progresses, the unit boundary will start shifting through neighborhood negotiation, driven by the needs of users, eventually developing its own pattern on the facade. The interior space and the facade would continuously evolve, creating a natural relation between the user and their inhabited space. The facade system is designed to maintain visual consistency, but also deliver customization options for the users to swap and change. Therefore, a window wall system is adopted to allow installation from the inside. The 3 different panel system provides the user flexibility of choices between lighting condition, visual privacy, and furniture layout. Spaces like bedroom and office do not require fully glazed curtain wall, which could be partially enclosed for better thermal performance. There is also flexibility of choices between interior spaces versus exterior balcony. Various lengths and locations of balcony can be chosen based on user preference. Urbanization is one of the significant factors that will transform the cities around the world by shifting population from suburban area towards urban area. The increase of density in megacities are addressed through vertical growth. Within a high-density megacity, the scale of population becomes disproportionate with the conventional classification of urban territories. The increase in population and density has shifted the conventional classification of territories up by 1 level. A high-rise residential tower can have the same population as the conventional block or neighborhood. Therefore, mass housing with a single-purpose design that only meets the living standards of individual household is no longer applicable. The design of high-rise building needs to address the original function of conventional block or neighborhood. The block level in the vertical community is designed to occupy 15 to 20 households. People are grouped with similar interests. On every 2 to 4 floors, they manage the space they inhabit in a collective control fashion. As Jane Jacob believes that this type of small-scale community allows people to have an innate degree of natural cross-connection within itself to promote social interaction. Therefore, both public and private shared community spaces are inserted within the block. These social activities hotspot could help stimulate intimacy within the neighborhood. The neighborhood is the tower itself, composed of multiple residential blocks with a helix stairway that interconnects all public amenities and retail spaces. The primary anchor public amenities include urban parks, multi-purpose theater, urban agriculture, fitness center, and shared office space. In between the major anchors are smaller retail space. An interplay relation would occur between the public space and adjacent residential block. Residents would attend the social activities within the neighborhood. Additionally, the character of each block can be determined by the adjacent public program, which would naturally group people with similar interests. The form development of the neighborhood started with the conventional standard core and corridor design to maintain the efficiency of a high-rise structure. However, as the height of the residential block is constantly growing, the amount of retail space on the podium level remains the same and has become disproportionate with the size of residential space. Therefore, the podium is vertically distributed along the helix stairway. This allows even proportion of commercial space versus residential space balance, as well as injecting social life into the residential space. The shared activity space for residences are also distributed with the helix stairway under the commercial space. This design strategy could resolve the privacy issue as the public uses the stairway. The larger public anchor programs are then inserted into the neighborhood. Large public spaces are carved out from the residential block. The helix stairway was rerouted to reduce the travel distance as well as to offer different view of scenery along the stairway. The public anchor program allows residents within the community to cross-connect and also interact with the public. Urban park spaces were designed within a high ceiling for better exposure of sunlight. Natural contours of landscaping and seating are combined for people to gather and relax. The parametric can then be used to distribute the household based on users' space needs and common interests. After residency, the boundary of individual households can be shifted with changing allocation design strategies through neighborhood negotiation. Lastly, the customizable facade allows building to constantly evolve to reflect the living habit of individual users. The support level provided by the architect has then transcended from the basic structure of mechanical structure and mechanical services provided by John Haberkin into the design and planning for an active neighborhood relation, as well as the functioning of a community for public collaboration and promoting intimacy within the users. With the support of technology and the innovative construction method, the design of mass housing can transition and evolve from product of mass production into a customized home tailored for the user and supported by the neighborhood. Just like what Mary Carpo said, all that is digital is variable, and all that is digitally variable is potentially open to interaction, communality, and participation. This approach shifts the design of high-rise residential from stacked plan layout with monumental facade into a dynamic system that always maintains overall coherence. In this case, the parametric is no longer in service for a particular style from a single hand, but helps the community member and architects to collaborate and design through many hands. Architecture under the influence of industrialization and mass production has developed
you have 5 minutes.
Okay. Architecture under the influence of industrialization and mass production has developed a culture of design towards uniformity and standardization. This thesis explores the possibility of deploying the advanced technology of mass customization and parametrics for a personalization culture in architecture. Consequently, incorporating the diverse user preferences and changing needs of social environment to transform the living condition of high-density residential from homogenized towards individually initiated flexibility. The intention is to support a personalization culture in architecture that could incentivize people's emotional connection with the physical environment and making architecture more sustainable by establishing an enduring relation with the user. That's it.
Thank you, Benyi. Wonderful presentation. At this point in time, I'd like to open up the floor to Q&A. So gentlemen, anybody who wishes to speak at this point in time and address Benyi's concept, please step forward.
Okay, I'll just get the ball rolling because typically it's the second reader. So I thank you very much for your presentation. As Bruce said, Benyi, it was pretty well clean, concise, and you got a lot of the imagery that we had discussed earlier out. My first question would pertain to better defining, if you could please better define the nature of leadership in design. After having read the book again and noticing how you conclude the book, you put statements and quotables from people such as Jane Jacobs, who mentions neighborhoods are mundane organs of self-government, right? And at the same time, you have entire chapters that are discussing bottom-up problems of participation. You start quoting DiCarlo, who says, architecture is too important to be left to architects, right? So I'm just quite curious if you can better define how you would conclude the role of the architect with respect to leadership in design.
Okay. I think architects, we design we plan the environment, that's for sure. But then it's the user who inhabits the space. So eventually this designing and planning needs to happen with the user. However, architects do need to take a leadership role in this design. So like incorporating the user preferences while maintaining a leadership role. Does that answer the question?
Well, the way I look at it is, like, for example, we've seen the recent subway expansion, right? And I don't think that, yes, there are lots of civic leaders that have pushed for the transportation networks to be expanded, but I think you got to define the role of the architectural design. Say, for example, those stations, are they taking a leadership role in the community, or are they just facilitating some sort of just operations of making a really cool looking building? Because I do like the fact that you're talking about this notion of letting the users define their spaces, right? But at the same time, you kind of also say stuff like, on the one hand, you say architecture is too important to be left to the architects, right? And then you also start kind of talking about the problems with giving that power of design to the general public. So when I was using that subway example, I think that, you couldn't have said, hey, let everyone design this station by plebiscite or something, right? So I think you have to be a little bit more forceful on positioning how you see the role of the architect as a leader in that design capacity.
Right.
Maybe I can jump in. I think one of the challenges, Benny, is that it's not the answer to this isn't a one-liner. In effect, as these quotes that Vincent has put forward suggest, but in some ways, it's I think one way to talk about it is the position you put forward in your presentation this morning of the challenge of a typical tower apartment, where there's a kind of a generic decision making of what the needs of potential residents would be. And we kind of describe it in terms of, is it a 1-bedroom apartment, a 2-bedroom apartment, a 3-bedroom apartment, versus the kind of nuancing of the residents in those examples you showed us, of students to what was it? What kind of family was it? A transgenerational family. And I think when you responded to Vincent about this kind of the architect working with the users, it's hard because it's maybe not that specific transgenerational family, but there's that some kind of dialogue you're suggesting of needs and design responses somehow interconnecting.
Can I just want to add something actually, because I think this is like far more sophisticated, as you're saying, Arthur, than just saying what is the role of the architect. Like, it's a fantastic question, especially given this use case, because I think this is definitely a type of architecture that is a point of contention, I think, for a lot of, let's say, quote unquote, architects or like true designers. And so I think what makes it so complex is that, you know, typically these are a building type that is heavily driven by market condition, right? So you almost can't remove, like, so some of the questions I have, like when you talk about design is, you know, to what extent should the design acknowledge things like resaleability, things like what is permanent versus impermanent, how does it address different structural modules, right? Because you can't, like, these are things that would define what flexibility and capacity your modules themselves would have. I wonder, like, if from my perspective, I appreciate, like, I just want to say, like, the graphics are phenomenal, so I really appreciate that effort. In some instances, I'm kind of left wondering about other things because, you know, like, you know, I mentioned the structural capacity, but what about like mechanical? Like, these are like heavily complex mechanical buildings, right? Or is this supposed to be completely passively? I know I'm getting maybe too detailed beyond, say, the scope of maybe the thesis, but I'm wondering if you're talking about the true flexibility of modularization and customizability. There's a whole infrastructure that needs to follow that as part of the design.
Yes, I think John Hopkins' open building, they kind of started that approach, which is using raised floor and modulations to help giving that flexibility. So raised floor with can help resolve some of the plumbing issue and partition wall issues, and as well. What I was showing using different paneling system that can be modulated to help with that to provide that kind of.
So if that's the case, I would expect then like at the very least, part of your thesis would, like, maybe I'm just not as familiar as with other people, but I would expect part of the thesis material to actually show the conception or notion that you've thought of that in some form as part of the deep effort of this whole, you know, exposition here.
Maybe Benyi, you could go to the one of the slides where you have the floor plate
yes,
highlighted. I mean, for me, one challenge in this, the time frame of a presentation like this is how do you touch all the complexity and his for me his ambition to.
Well, I want to ask about the script, but right now I've read the book, so I read the book, so I'm familiar. Like, if you want to point to specific pages or whatever, I have it open as well. So.
Do you want to describe some of the support things that you've considered to inform the way you designed your building?
Okay, yeah. So first of all, the building is adopted like this kind of pinwheel design, and then it's a 4-meter modules. So the mechanical services are these white blocks along the corridor of the units. So most of the structures are along the exterior of the floor plate, and also using the core, so that this residential pink space can be is unconstrained space that can have walls shifted, partition walls shifted with a raised floor detail. And also this, by keeping all the mechanical services closer to the corridor, it allows most of the washrooms and kitchens to be closer towards the corridor, therefore better natural lighting for the other spaces, such as living room and kitchen and bedroom, that can be remained closer towards the building facade.
But for you, the pink zones are completely flexible in terms of their allocation of
That's right, yeah.
unit size or unit geometries, partition walls versus demising walls, and even making new openings between floors or closing openings
Yes.
between floors,
Yes,
which became the block of your parametric exploration that you showed us.
yes, yes.
Is there anywhere that shows like you have a lot of really great AXOs and ISOs that I find are very helpful in understanding the overall conceptual intent and composition of the pursuit effort. I'm wondering, is there something that explores, like, this is fine because it shows, like, I'm assuming you're probably going to use like fan coil units or something like that, which I think is like, I mean, if you're completely rethinking the thing, I think that's like a really bad model to go by, but that's a whole other subject. So we'll just ignore that. But is there an ISO that actually shows, you know, because you had those really nice ISOs that show the different modules and how you could reconfigure them. Is there one that shows all of the support elements that are integrated into that and how they can move around with that? That I guess is what I was looking for. Like, the plan is useful because it just shows you, you know, what your intent is in terms of services, but I would imagine that those things would be part of your, as you called it, quote unquote, algorithm or script. Are they not?
So you're asking, like, does these diagrams have like?
Yeah. So like in the plan you just showed me, where you had like the little white boxes that indicated what the services were or where the services were, like on the demising walls. I was wondering, you know, like when you have these isometric drawings where you have these kind of Tetris pieces, you know, is there any limitation as to where these things can be conjoined or touching each other? Like, so I guess what I'm looking for, I mean, this kind of goes to kind of a second question. I'm sorry I'm broadening this, guys, but is that, you know, the script itself, you call it like an algorithm, but I mean, I would imagine that there are a lot of us on this call that know that it's not just an algorithm. There are deliberate decisions made that are a series of kind of modules that say, do this, if this, and that sort of thing. And I guess I'm wondering is, you know, you're making decisions regardless. I mean, maybe this goes back to Vince's initial point, is you're making decisions as to what can be locked and what is flexible, right? As part of the design process. I mean, that's part of your architecture. That's your intervention, let's say. So you're giving, it's just like when people build a car or they design and buy a car, they're given the perception that they have control over, you know, customizing the thing. But really, you know, like the body is the body, the engine is the engine, and there are some things that you can bolt on, and it's mostly superficial stuff. I think you're arguably, going beyond that and saying that it's a little bit more than just a superficial customization, because you're allowing actual pieces to move around. And this, but there's still an element of intervention as an architect, as the designer, to say that this thing is locked to a certain degree, and here are my parameters and the things that are locked and how they're interconnected. And I guess that's what I'm asking, you know, where is that? How's that described? And not just on the level that you're showing like pretty isometric drawings, but also in your script. Do you decompose your script and say, you know, this is what this functions as part of my quote unquote algorithm, which feeds this and that sort of thing? Because I think that's just as important as describing visually what's happening as well in this context, like in this forum that we're having right now.
Right.
So sorry, I'll leave it at that. I'll stop talking.
Then maybe I'll pick that up in maybe a little bit differently. I'm trying to figure out, you did a really comprehensive analysis of a lot of precedents. And I think it was very consistent, and you're sort of challenging this idea that, you know, these things are kind of given, and then you don't get as much sort of that engagement. And Mark sort of makes the point, you know, you also make the point that Mark did, which is on the document about customization of a vehicle and what does that mean. And it's peculiar because you use the example of Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and some of these as being platforms that, you know, they kind of give you an open platform, which is the terminology you use to do this. And I do wonder, how do you reconciliate the difference between a company who owns the means of production to also offer a sort of a framework of platform, and the role that you as an architect kind of play in this, right? Because there's a difference, right? There's a difference with Mercedes-Benz give you options to customize your vehicle versus there's a difference when an architect has a building who he doesn't own for a user to kind of provide some input, right? So I wonder what your perspective is from that sort of level, right?
Right.
How does the architect and the user, right, engage that kind of process of production to, in some ways, you know, address the cost and economic implications, the ecologies that go around making a building?
So you're asking like if the product manufacturer would actually how does the product manufacturer relates to the final design of this concept?
Think of it more simple, right? So you say Facebook has a platform that it tells you a platform that you customize, right? But Facebook owns that platform, owns sort of the way they are not just the designer of the platform, but they're actually the people who kind of deal with the economic of making that platform available to you. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So how do you see that different or similar, or what is the role that the architect can play on this process where, in the case of your building?
Right. Well, so Facebook and their how do I say? Facebook and like many softwares are those many of computer softwares are sort of open sources designed, so they kind of give certain aspect of that software to the users to generate content, and I find that to be very be quite amazing actually for architecture to have. So it's just like how my project thinking is, architects don't control everything, but we kind of give suggestions of the structure of how that can be transformed to the user for to create something unique.
So in your context, the user is only giving input. You're still kind of not having, or how do they engage economically with the development of the building?
economically.
Arthur, you're laughing. It's like,
Sorry,
I mean,
I just spent a year trying to keep this guy contained in some degree, and all of the things I've been pushing him in on are the things that are now exploding in his face. So no, I'm not saying that. That's why I'm laughing. I'm poor Benyi. Anyway, I think it's an absolutely no, it's not these are not inappropriate questions to raise at all. That's maybe I'll jump in and say something that's, and not to speak for you, Benyi, but in some ways I've seen this work in the last few months as the scenario that he's painted is one where in some regards the systems that produce the built environment are able to absorb much of what Benyi's talking about, in that somebody's got to decide on the support, what he's calling the support level of the building, and the what's in that core and the circulation. And then there is what he described, it was kind of using real estate kind of terms of buying property, that instead of buying a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom apartment with a den or not a den facing north or facing south, from the whatever 6 or 8 different unit styles that are available in the sales center, there's a kind of maybe it's kind of in that sales center, the level we now have of, do you want a granite counter or a marble countertop, is what are the kind of features or needs that you have? What is the profile of your family, or what is what are the desires? That kind of profiling he gave us with some of those scenarios, and that by describing what your needs are, that somehow being put through the process, the developer would say, well, that will cost you $1.2 million or $847,000 or $3.6 million, in a way that it seems that with this differentiation between the support level and the allocation level, and then the content of the unit, the infill, it seems to me that there's capacity within this current, or I at least can imagine capacities within the current systems of delivering these kinds of this building typology, that it could be achieved. That we're not talking about a different universe entirely. I think it feels to me that he's trying to and maybe I've drunk the Kool-Aid at this point, being a supervisor, that he's working within the frameworks and trying to, although he doesn't declare it this way, is trying to work outward from what exists, as opposed to almost in the case of some students, purposeful blinding to what exists and trying to recreate a world from scratch. So I don't know if that's helpful, or if I've just gone on a completely other tangent.
No, I think that's super helpful. I guess, I mean, if I express my thought as a sort of a very specific criticism, Benyi, on when you define parametrics, that's on your page 46, you sort of stated as the relation between design intent and design response. And then very quickly, you kind of think of it, parametrics, as sort of space and formal manipulations that kind of create some level of agency, right? Where we are kind of looking through a spectrum of options, and then we decide on a certain fitness value. So what is the best? And I think that's a valuable sort of input, but it misses one kind of key component, and is that parametrics is in essence manipulation of parameters, and not much more, right? In some ways, it's associations between different data points that we can use in a myriad of ways. And what's useful, I think, for your project, and I think is some of the aspect that Mark brings up, which is about the structural and the mechanical, which fundamentally define the flexibility of the system. And the other one is the economic. So decision that Arthur is kind of referring to, of square footage, you actually have all that data in your definition, I'm pretty sure, right? When you create a panel that has square footage. When you create a number of mullions, that's a list that has a certain number of items in it. And I'm not seeing much of that, even though that's essentially what will make your process feasible. If you think of it from someone who is making the building, that's actually where the strength of your process is, and actually be able to give those numbers and be able to identify that if I want this 3-bedroom versus a 2-bedroom, it can easily translate to these numbers and this cost, and there's also these efficiencies, right?
Good.
And I like your proposal, like in many ways. Like I think your design language is very clear. I think you did a really good job as articulating through the elements that you're using, the mullions, for instance, those to give a framework that allows for those material changes and those pattern changes to take place. But that's what it seems that it falls short on the mass and on the sort of larger scale, but it misses sort of those details that makes these things actually. And I'm bringing this up mostly because if you do go into the workplace, is that kind of understanding of those parameters and how they might affect your building that will be the most effective way for you to succeed and having a more active role, right? So that these tools become more effective. And that's why that definition is a big kind of, I'm critical of the definition only because it's missing kind of that bit about all the different data that is actually inherently produced from these systems beyond the surfaces.
It's what makes it tenable.
With those last few comments, we're getting close to 20 after 10.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions to wrap up?
Just if I could jump in for a sec. As this is a final presentation, we do have a little extra time.
Okay.
So we could easily go till 10:30 and still have plenty of time for our discussion after.
Thank you.
So one thing I just wanted to say is that, and then I know Arthur's kind of talked about this earlier, but we really have, as a committee, gone out of our way to make sure that Benyi had a good theoretical framework and really got a spot-on delivery of the project. And I'm glad that you guys, the externals, picked up on that. And I'm also glad and find it interesting, just as Arthur did, that the focus and preoccupation of a lot of this conversation is the operations and execution and the kind of viability of this project, which again, Benyi does speak to the kind of level of depth that you've gone into. But I do think that, both Mark and David have raised questions that are notable that I think might fall into just like a little bit of a small additional component in your book that just addresses how, these aren't, it's not to say that you're ignorant to them, but the fact that I think you might be good to just mention that these are some things that, would have been next steps. Like I, for my part, my second set of questions was going to ask about like just that execution of operations, like, the issues about circulation, sound, the prep access areas, the even the procedures on the neighborhood negotiations, right? And then, I was also going to ask about the notion of, in light of this execution of the project, like, if we've already got the kind of parametricism that David's talking about already engaged, we know that there's various options that we can easily plug into, like upcodes or something to kind of correlate code compliance with this and just like see whether or not you can find a way to shove X number of units and whatever. So I think just the ability to speak to those points in a succinct way at the end might just really round it out. So it really defines better the scope of what your thesis was actually supposed to focus on.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll say that this is what you're proposing here is not impossible. It is actually long overdue. Where I was going at the beginning, and I think what David is bringing up is kind of a really is a good perspective as well, is the fact that it's ironic that we're sitting here discussing this. I totally get where Arthur and Vince are coming from on their side of things, but it's funny at the end of the day. It's like I would argue that you actually are kind of from certain perspectives. I'm not saying from our perspective, but let's say from a certain individual's perspective, like quote unquote owner being the developer, right? That has the most money to fork over on purchasing land or whatever. And maybe that's not the model for this, but let's just say that's one thing. And the other thing is the constructor, right? Those are the people, ironically, that you need to convince that as radical, like to them, this seems like alienation. It's like building on Mars, right? those are kind of from a certain perspective, is that's who you're convincing. Is this impossible? Absolutely not, right? Are we asking you to like detail the mechanical systems and all of a sudden become a mechanical or structural engineer? Absolutely not. But what we're saying is that there's another layer of viability, I think, that's missing, that could be added, like Vince says, that would all of a sudden make people look at that and say, oh, you know what, that looks like this. That isn't foreign, like Arthur is saying, right? It's not really flipping the model on its head. There is rigor and a system here that I can get my head around that makes this something. And I totally think that this is like, this what you're talking about here is creates both stimulating architectural interest, spatial interest, and a generally a new way of kind of looking at things. So I would argue, like, and I know this is not part of the conversation, but I would say that sorry guys, but the final layer is what all this means in COVID, but that's not part of this presentation. But I think
too soon, man. Come on, seriously.
I had to throw it out there, but I truly do feel like that for the most part. That's why I will echo the fact that the graphics are well represented, the ideas are concise. That's why we're able to ask for these things. That's what I'll leave with.
Cool. Well, maybe is it time for last comments, or does anyone else want to throw in anything before
I mean, one last comment I can say. I mean, since you're kind of looking at this is this will, I mean, Benji, I think this is the topic that you're engaging in will always be contentious. Like it would always raise eyebrows and it would always be challenging. And it's not because it is not, as Mark says, is not that you know, this is kind of long overdue, is that there is easy ways to kind of dismiss it. So it's important that you kind of become aware of the space in which it exists, right? One of these dimensions that I think is worth noting is that in the continuum of sort of industrialization, we went from hand tool technology, which is, you know, we use our energy to make things, to then we use our intelligence to also think about them. Then we use our intelligence to make machines that then use kind of oil to make things. And now we're in a point where our intelligence is used to create constructs, right? That think for themselves, that execute and automate processes of logic. And parametricism is, or the idea of using associative design is not neither quite there yet, but it will eventually become some of it. Right? Like when you model something, you're not defining all the vertices, right? That's a form of artificial intelligence. It is actually defining a lot of the parameters for you. It's doing some of the thinking for you, whether it's on the end of processing information. I think the challenge is that we're still ultimately creating these constructs, right? So understanding what those constructs say and how they, what the outputs might be, what the existence of them necessitates is kind of a critical dimension of the work, because otherwise then you can be more informed in how do you explain what they can do. And I think these things are fascinating, but one of the things that will come back and again is the economics, right? What makes these buildings feasible? What agency does architects, designers, and the builders and the developers play into it? And there's a concerted effort, at least in mass timber, that, you know, some of the architects become the producers, and Katera being an example, among many others, who are kind of gaining some of that agency back. And that's possibly the territory in which you might want to operate as you graduate. So it's worth kind of understanding how they're approaching these things, right? As you mentioned Tesla, or mentioned in your document, how do they change that sort of economic aspect of making these things possible, and how these tools are actually doing, what role they're playing, and be critical about them too, right? Like design isn't either the computer or us. I think there's a negotiation, or the materials, and there's a negotiation between the three of them that is essential. That's it. And my final comment beyond that, I mean, your document is very comprehensive. I'm only critical of it partially because I want you to be empowered to move forward, right? And that's also, I think, ultimately the goal. So I don't necessarily have a comment I would put on the document, but I do have a comment. My comment is more about think clearly and try to understand very critically what the role of these tools are beyond the form and the space generation, or sort of the architecture, if you want to call it, dimension of it. That's it.
Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, maybe I'll say in closing, it's been a pleasure working with you this year, Benyi. I have been, a lot of the time I've been uncomfortable with your work in that you just keep making it, it just kept getting broad. It's, for me, at times broader and broader and broader. And I'm now seeing at this stage, finally, how it's, why it needed to get that breadth of why, you know, for you, what we're looking at right now in this image, to build your argument, you needed the public in that building. It couldn't just be a residential tower and solve that enough. And then, you know, and so I've really enjoyed coming along with you for the ride, and I'm actually, for me, it's amazing that where this conversation today has gone beyond the work that you've presented to what the work is suggesting, the questions that we want answered, where we were all greedy, and in the end we want to know more. So no matter how much you answer, there's always more to be asked of you. Thank you for this work you've presented today, and the work you've done over this year.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any more questions or anybody wanting to wrap up any comments? Okay, well, congratulations, Benyi, on a wonderful presentation. It really is inspiring. I agree with all of the critics. The imagery, the concept, the execution was really masterfully done. So
yeah,
my heartfelt congratulations to you.
Thank you.
So I guess at this point in time, I might have asked Benyi to go on mute and we continue.
No, not
just
just
kick him
on
out.
mute. Benny has to leave the meeting.
Okay. I'll
Get out of
Hang
here,
on
Benny.
before you do, before you run away.
Hey,
So
Mark, you look like me.
yeah, I'm catching up.
What is good looking? You look like me.
So Benny, well, we follow this a similar pattern to previous milestone presentations, where you leave us now, and the committee and guests will discuss your project and determine an outcome. After which Arthur will talk to you in private. So you can leave the meeting now, and then Arthur, once we're done, you can initiate a new Zoom meeting with Benny.
Great.
And so. Yeah, and again, I'll just wrap up by saying thank you very much, Benny. Very nice presentation, very good discussion, and thank you to everybody who contributed to that, especially our guests. So.
Thank you.
And then I guess Leo and Mike are going to stop the recording.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Yep, stopping it now.
Yeah, and stopping the stream.